Hey, it's time for an Unbuffered Tuesday. Get rid of the... Hey, wait a minute. Matt, what are you doing in the studio?
What? Where?
Weren't
This
you
is my
just here?
office.
I feel like we did this already. I'm confused.
Maybe.
All right, well, I guess we'll just go with it. I'm Chris Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I'm back with Matt on Unbuffered, our show about whatever we want to talk about, I guess. But like, really, it's about how technology impacts the way we regulate technology, impacts the way we live our lives, and stuff like that. And getting it right. And Matt, I wanted to have you back on because there's something that it looks like we're not getting right, and we're pretty concerned about where it's going. The tribal license window, which has been used well. We got new spectrum that's about to move, and we got some bad news. I don't know if you just want to give the overview, and then we'll tell people that don't know what it is all about it.
Yeah, I mean, the overview is that there's opposition, speaking with the FCC, that is influencing, the perspective that there shouldn't be a tribal licensing window ever. And we find that hard to deal with, as sovereign nations within the borders of the United States. It's really the rights of the tribe to be able to access these resources, and through treaties and, a long legal process, at some point there may be a country giving back all of the spectrum to the tribes. But we have been working in the past with a mechanism, and that mechanism seems to be being taken away from us at the moment.
Right. So there's a spectrum coming up. The rules for that are being decided right now. In fact, I believe tomorrow afternoon as we record this, and I think for people that really jump on it, you might get it before then, but there's going to be what's it called? The sunshine kicks in. And
Yeah, sunshine period.
So the FCC is making a rule. There's rules around that. We'll explain how it goes, but basically we're concerned that we're about to not just lose a window on this particular spectrum slice, but that it's going to be much harder to get ones on future ones. So I wanted Matt on, though, because Matt's been there since the earlier days in which a lot of the precedents were set. So, and as Matt said, the history of this does go back to treaties. It goes back to well before even Matt was born. And
I'm not that old.
You're not dead yet either.
Yeah, I'm not dead.
So
I think I'll go for a walk.
So I think maybe the place to start is, I think, maybe where you got involved with it, and the importance of the antecedents to the modern tribal license window. But we're going to talk about spectrum that allows tribes to use some of the wireless access. And just for people that are really new to this, you have to understand how insulting it is when you're in an area where you don't have decent internet access and you're not allowed to use good spectrum to get it out to people because someone else has control of it and they're not using it within 100 miles of your area, and you're not allowed to use it at all. And so this is one way of dealing with that, but this is a real thing that like really impacts people. So Matt, how do we get down this path?
It's 25 years ago when I started working with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. We're building a network, and the tools that we understood how to use and were mentored through were wireless connections. And we were using spectrum, to unlicensed spectrum or license exempt or whatever, to be able to connect 2 points together and pass data. And so in the training that we got from Hans Werner Braun at the HP Ren organization, we got some really basic, like, here's 2 antennas. It's using this type of spectrum. It lives here. You're talking through these radio waves. You're passing data. Now go play with it. And once we realize the value of that, then we're like, okay, we need more of this. We need to be able to, propagate this and be widespread. We need to hook up a bunch of houses to this. How do we start going down these paths? And so we started looking into it, talking to experts like Harold Feld and Sasha Meinrath and folks. And we were early in the game. We were building a wireless network that was to support the tribes of SCTCA. And, I participated in international community wireless summits with Sasha Meinrath.
That's where you and I met Harold. Long before we actually did anything together.
Yeah, you and I met there. it was a really good foundational start to, to this bigger space that we're in today. But eventually we realized we didn't have enough spectrum. Um, Oddly enough, it came up through folks that were standing up radio stations, and somewhat pirate at the time radio stations, but then low power FM. And then there was an opportunity for tribes to actually participate. And I was the chair of the board of Native Public Media at the time, and there was an opportunity to get together and talk policy about FM radio spectrum and whether or not tribes could get a license. So, through the work at the FCC with Jeffrey Blackwell and others and Irene Flannery, we were able to come up with a tribal priority window for FM licensing for a station to cover tribal specific lands. So if a tribe was to apply for their license over their land to serve their community, they would prioritize in that competition as well as get that license, and it would be free of fees, renewable every, I think, 10 years. And so we pushed very hard to get that through the FCC's rulemaking process. It made it through, and we over doubled the amount of tribal FM radio stations that were out there. Native Public Media still works with those radio stations today. And it was a great piece of rulemaking. So fast forward a bit, we're all building broadband networks. We're hybridizing things between fiber, wireless, and other opportunities, and we have run into the wall of there is not enough spectrum out here for us to actually be able to deploy to the number of homes in a reservation from one distribution point. So managing the spectrum became a task, and building multiple towers to serve one area versus serving them all off of one tower became a necessity because there wasn't enough spectrum. We were interfering with ourselves. So opportunities
But
came
sorry,
up.
that's just, but to be clear, and I think it might help for people that aren't as technically sophisticated to understand. There's plenty of spectrum out there, but you're only allowed to use certain chunks of it, right? And I was trying to think. I was actually using a walkie-talkie this weekend when I was out doing my photography gig, and I was thinking about it because I was thinking at one of our events we might want to actually do this and like hold one up and be like, hey, like could I like use like there's a spectrum that is reserved for walkie-talkie use, right? Like
Yeah,
low powered walkie-talkies, and like you could put an FM station on there. It'd probably sound terrible, I think, for this
yeah,
chunk of
wouldn't go
spectrum.
that far. Yeah,
Right. But like in theory, but we've all decided that like for this chunk of spectrum, we're only like anyone can use it with walkie-talkies as long as they follow basic rules of how powerful they are and things like that, right?
right.
And it's like that for all kinds of different slices of the spectrum. When you say like you're using all the spectrum, like you're allowed to use like 4 small slices and you're using
Yeah,
all of that. But there's all kinds of spectrum around you that no one else is using that you are not allowed to use.
yeah. And as you said on the intro, there's a whole boatload of spectrum out there that is not being used and will never be used over tribal lands by those that hold the licenses for it. It just doesn't suit their interests. It's not part of their economic model. It's not part of their delivery system. It's not their target audience. It's not, there's a number of reasons why they wouldn't serve that community, and a few reasons why they should serve that community, but we know they're not going to. So why not let tribes have access to that over those tribal lands? So yeah, as I was saying, that we are using all the available unlicensed spectrum that we are allowed to use. We've done things like licensing point to point so that we remove, one chunk of spectrum out of the equation so that we can now use it to distribute with. We've done a number of things, but we still are up against the wall with not enough tools in the toolbox, if you will. So 2.5 gigahertz educational broadcast spectrum is being recalled to the FCC because it was misused or
Right,
underutilized.
it was being done like 10 years ago. It was being
Yeah,
recalled then.
underutilized.
Right. You're
And
speaking in the present tense about something that happened a little while ago.
all right, so in the past, so this is happening. We're recognizing this is happening. We would like access to that spectrum because it's good spectrum to be able to serve communities with, exactly what we're doing with the other unlicensed space. And it would be great to be a license holder because not only do you have that tool in the toolbox to be a license holder and control that spectrum without interference. It is for tribes, which is a whole nother tangent. It is an economic tool. It is a tangible asset or a bankable asset that they can borrow money against because it has intrinsic value, and it can be proven what the value is at the FCC, that you can borrow money against it to build network and build out your communications. So it it has two values to tribes, and
Right.
so
Sorry, and I thought I would
go
share
ahead.
that in the course of working on this issue in the last week, we've heard multiple times from Chickasaw Nation about how past spectrum auctions, when they did not have a seat at the table, they would have the companies that were going for the spectrum would come to them and ask them for tribal consent, basically to support their effort of getting the spectrum, and they would then use that like permission, and support from the tribe in order to get the spectrum, and then they would turn their back and not do anything for the tribe. And so that's a different dynamic. If the tribe itself has the license and can actually still work with that provider would still get the license, but they would actually have to make good on promises that they were making. And so it changes the dynamic there as well.
That's right. And there's been a number of those cases, not just Chickasaw, that have happened. And, tribes bargaining in good faith over, opportunities and trying to be supportive, but then getting the short end of the stick again, in these situations. So, 2.5 gigahertz was an opportunity to reapply that language from the FM priority. And we were able to get a tribal priority window, not a licensing window, but a tribal priority licensing window to be applied to 2.5 gigahertz. FCC promoted that they expected 12 applications. It's really based on the number of tribal telecommunications companies that exist. There were over 400 applications, I think, for 330 some entities received applications for this, and that is being built out, is being utilized today. And so I think it proved concept that it's a valuable piece of the puzzle for tribes. And I think, moving forward, then anytime that spectrum is going to move, either get warehoused or get auctioned or get renamed or reclassified or, you know, painted a different color, tribes wanted to be able to get access to that as it becomes, active over the tribal lands. And so we've been pushing for another tribal priority window in multiple auctions that have come up, but we have been rejected in the process, and actually to the point where things are being downscaled from a tribal priority window to a tribal licensing window now. We are now stuck with and are still trying to defeat the rural tribal lands definition, which
Right. So let's
causes
pause.
tribes.
Let's
Yeah.
pause there and come back to that. So basically, for people to understand, all of this spectrum that we're talking about is managed by the federal government, and they periodically change how it's being used, often because it's not being used efficiently, or because they could do something, and this is relevant for this space. They could basically say to the group of current users of that spectrum, hey, we'll pay you this amount if you'll go away and not use it anymore. And then we'll use it for this other thing that's worth a bunch more. And so let's just, if I made numbers up, we're gonna license this. We're gonna have an auction, and we think we're gonna raise $1 billion from people that want to pay for it. And we're going to give you $10 million to leave it alone. And then we'll have the rest of that money's left over, and we'll put it into the general treasury or use it for other purposes. Generally, it goes back to the treasury, I think. And so it's important to understand, like, the spectrum gets moved around and reorganized over different times. The spectrum that we're talking about is often, not exclusively, but it is often in areas that aren't going to raise large prices in the auction. It's often in areas where, if a company like AT&T were to get it, they're not even really going to build it out there necessarily, and it's certainly not going to be a priority. And so these are areas that are often not really going to sway the value of the auction, in particular because of the way it's been constructed. So even though we think the 2.5 gigahertz was a big success, there was a significant problem with that. And that was that it was there was an arbitrary decision made by Chairman Pai, who we give him credit for pushing this through and making it happen. However, he only did it with a definition of certain rural tribes and left out a bunch of tribes that could really use it. So that's what you're getting into there with the rural tribes definition. We had hoped not only to have a tribal licensing window moving forward, but that it would be available available to more tribes than were previously allowed to be involved in the 2.5 gigahertz. So that's just sort of like a preview for what Matt's about to share.
Yeah, that's right. And the rural tribal lands definition removes any tribe that's adjacent or within 25 miles of a population of 50,000 or greater. And a lot of times the tribes are pushed to the edge of society as it existed previously, and society has then suburbed its way out to these reservations. So the population density has grown next to them, even though the services never came to them. So, it's a situation where if you step 1 foot across that tribal border, that tribal boundary, the resources are gone, and we're trying to you know compete against that, and get the definition to be able to support all the tribes, not just ones that are far away. We I was on a call today with the FCC, and we heard a couple of folks speak up. One of them was the Shoshone Bannock, and that tribe did not get access to the 2.5 licensing window because of that very definition. And
And they're in Idaho. Like it's
they're in
not like
Idaho.
they're not outside Denver.
Right. So, so there's definitely a problem with the equation, and we'd like to fix that. We go ahead.
So I think, I mean, one of the things to understand is that there are two major auctions happening right now: AWS 3, and I think the AWS 3 we didn't have very high hopes, right? I mean, it wasn't as good as Spectrum. We wouldn't be able to make as much use of it necessarily. So we wanted to see a licensing window. We know people would have done some good stuff with it, but the upper C band is moving now, and that's what the rulemaking is on right now about the rules for that auction, and that's where we've run into this buzzsaw where we're really upset about the way the rules have been proposed, not only suggesting that there would not be a tribal licensing window for the C band, but suggesting that there would be no more licensing windows under the current law, which could be, in effect for the next 10 years, basically when a fair amount of spectrum is going to move. So Matt and I are part of, and I want to give Harold credit, Harold Feld in Public Knowledge, Michael Calabrese at New America. They've done really great work. I didn't want to have them on the show last minute. They're really busy with all of this stuff, and I thought Matt and I could explain it fairly well at this. But they're working right now before Sunshine kicks in to try to get people to understand that, like, look, if we're not going to get it for C band, then we're not going to get it for C band. But don't make it so we can't even talk about this, or we have to like climb this big mountain in order to talk about it in the next auction, because this is a concept that is important and makes a difference in people's lives, and there's practically no cost to the industry to do it. And so, it seems to be that Chairman Carr is really opposed to this, and has been, him and his staff seem to be really out to get rid of it. I don't know. That's the impression I get. I don't follow it as closely as other folks do, but like it's just one of these things that, like, we haven't seen a good reason. There's not even a lot of people lobbying against it from what we can tell, but it seems like Chairman Carr just really does not want to see this happen. And so we saw a preview of the rules, and we're hoping that those rules will change before they get voted on next week.
Yeah, I mean, we've done all our due diligence and spoken to all the commissioners, the chairman, and we feel like there's been some pushback. There's been some misunderstanding of the amount of tribal projects that are actually taking place. I think the chairman's office was a little surprised to know that there's almost 200 tribal networks in play. And there's things like that. I think they do have some support from industry, in former Chairman Pai at CTIA, and that's a problem that,
Right. So the former chairman of the Federal Communications Commission is now running the biggest wireless lobby for the AT&T, T-Mobile, and the other one, Verizon. And so it's a little bit frustrating when you see this revolving door in action, because it's like, we're like, we should use the rules of Chairman Pai, and he's like, no, we should not. So it's
we
a
should
little bit
eliminate those rules and make them no rule for you. Yeah. So today we learned, like Michael Calabrese shared, that these folks are fighting for upper C band as if it's treasure and gold, and the lower C band that they won in auction has still not been put into use, and it's been years. So what are they actually doing? Are they warehousing spectrum? Are they intending to hoard it? Why obtain it if you're not going to use it? Why obtain it over tribal lands where you're never going to use it? Why not let these networks exist
These are Wall
And
Street games. I mean, this is the answer to the question, I think, and it's not the only answer. There's different answers. But I think this is something it's taken me a while to get my head around. I think it's important that people think about it, which is, why do they do this? They do this because of the scarcity mentality in Wall Street, which is to say that AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile have a value on Wall Street, and that value is higher the more spectrum that they control, even if they don't use it, because that means no one else can compete with them. And so when you're talking about warehousing it, Matt, there's this implication of, like, for them, it is worth it to pay $1 billion for something they are not going to use, because it actually makes them worth more than $1 billion of extra value, basically. And so this is like the perverted logic, though, that we have on Wall Street with around monopoly power. And so they actually have very sound financial reasons for wanting to control all this. Government is supposed to make rules that don't encourage this sort of a thing, because we have collateral damage in the form of these tribes now who can't have access to the spectrum that they could use to lower the cost of building networks. And it actually even impacts the taxpayers, because we are putting a lot of taxpayer dollars. We put a few $1 billion into connecting people on tribal lands, and it's worth it. And I think it's really important. And we need to do it with the best technology possible. But frankly, if we make more wireless available, we will need less fiber optic investment. We can do a lot more. And I've always said this, people don't appreciate this. My criticism of wireless is always based on the fact that we're not allowed to use a lot of the spectrum. We are very limited in the quality, the reliability, and the bandwidth of wireless signals, not because wireless sucks, but because we have not developed a way to share it and use it in ways where we can have access to choice spectrum to get people connected. And so we pay more in taxpayer dollars ultimately in order to raise the value of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile in this whole weird game. And if we had proper government policy, we wouldn't be in this weird circle. But that seems to be where we are right now.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, some tribes are suited to be in this game. Some tribes are economically stable to the point where they have actually competed with these auctions. But you know, it's out of 576 federally recognized nations, there's maybe 6 that have attended these auctions and been part of these auctions, and maybe even one spectrum. So it's, you know, it's outside the realm of possibility without some other solution. And the tribal priority window, or the tribal licensing window, as it is now called, is a mechanism that has worked and would still work and continue to work. And, you know, we just don't understand why it's they're gunning for it, why they're trying to eliminate it completely.
Mm-hmm. You just playing with the microphone there as you're talking.
Oh, is that the mic?
In case you didn't know where it was, that's where it is.
Weird.
So it's important for people to understand that even though sunshine is kicking in for the Federal Communications Commission, there's plenty of time to talk to your elected representatives, to talk to senators in particular. I mean, especially if you're in Nebraska, if you're in South Dakota, there are some senators are more interested in this than others, and you can always reach out to us or Harold Feld to figure out how to plug in. We're always trying to help people out. We just, at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, we just released a fact sheet that you can share with senators to push them, because I think of it as like they could nudge the FCC to do the right thing, they can shove the FCC to do the right thing, and they can demand that the FCC do the right thing here. I mean, we have a tribal licensing window based on a bunch of precedents and things like that, but it could be put into law. Like we could do more on this to make sure it really happens. But right now, we just don't want to miss this opportunity on this spectrum if we can avoid it.
Yeah, but will they? You know, that's the real question: is will they take a stand? Will they actually draw a line in the sand where they're going to say that, like, hey, we are going to support this? And that's the problem. I don't know that we have enough support on the Hill and in some of these departments of the U.S. government during this administration to be able to pull this off. So how do we create a stopgap so that we don't, you know, end up with nothing forever? And that's the problem.
So I think the last thing that I'd just like to touch on with this is that sense of like There's 200 tribes that are out there building. Well, I shouldn't say that way. So, by our numbers, by primarily the work of Jess on the Institute for Local Self Reliance's team that works on this, we think there are 90 networks in operation, 90 tribal networks in operation. I believe, and I could get these numbers mixed up. I believe there's 50 that are in the process of building but haven't turned on yet, and there are another 60 that we
Yep.
think they're evaluating it and are likely to move forward. So that's
Yeah.
a lot. And I feel like, Matt, if you just want to say a couple words about this pretty remarkable movement in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this for years, but over the last 5 years, and really over the last 4.5 years, you've asked me the question, like, where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 10 years? Kind of a thing. And with the funding that was available through the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, through NTIA and such, we saw a big influx of cash go directly to tribes for the first time, and we saw an actual investment in Indian country. And I was very hopeful that we would see a number of tribes building, and I think the pace that we are seeing that develop is quite dramatic. It is a paradigm shift in the space. However, we are also seeing the end of a cycle of funding, the end of sort of an openness to support these types of things in the country at the moment. And where will the next wave come from? So we're hopeful that the tribes that are building networks, that are getting expertise in this space, that are growing their businesses, will be able to support other tribes that are trying to step into that space. And then we'll just need to figure out where the dollars come from moving forward. But we are definitely further along um, in a very positive fashion compared to where we were when we've been, the last 25 years. There was 19 total for the 20 of them, and all of a sudden here we go. So it's been pretty dramatic.
So that the other thing is you spent a lot of your life worrying about wireless and trying to make it work before you rose above it all and Paul Miranda took it over for you.
Yes. Totally.
um what do you think, like, we've paused in terms of like the excitement around like CBRS and like sharing spectrum? Because, like, I mean, it's been what, 10 years since the PCAST report came out, I think, talking about this. And I just think, like, we're talking about the tribal licensing window, and that's important, but like, it wouldn't solve the problem. I mean, it certainly doesn't solve all problems. It would be terrific for tribal nations, but it doesn't get to the other issue, which is for anyone to be able to have better access to wireless technology that is not being used around them. I feel like the industry, like the big wireless companies, have done a pretty good job of making sure that we don't move forward technologically with smart radios. And I don't know if you've thought about that much.
Yeah, it's all about proprietary use of the spectrum, not smart radio shared use of the spectrum. It is very much my network, not our network. And I feel like the FCC has been very stagnant in the rollout of spectrum in general, not necessarily just to tribes, but in general. And it's really reducing the amount of innovation in the wireless space. I mean, there is some, a lot of activity in the free space optical, which is not radio wave spectrum, it's light spectrum, and it's not maintained the same way. But I
It's
don't
really
think we
just
have a
Tirana. I mean, like, the only thing I feel like, if someone was arguing with you, I think you might say, well, Tirana's been really innovative. Okay, well, like, them and who? I don't know. I'm
right.
not in this space totally, so I don't know. But
No, and Tirana is a great example of a great technology and change in technology and use of technology that is unfortunately fairly unaffordable for tribes to participate unless they get, industry level or commercial level funding to support it. The other problem with the wonderful technology of folks like Tirana is it's power hungry, and a lot of the tribes are off grid. So there's a whole nother tangent dynamic that we must explain to go down that path. But without competition, without innovation, without new spectrum coming on board for new innovation in product, and technological products to move data around, I think we've been fairly stagnant for a decade, and I'd like to see that open up.
right,
Um,
it's not because the technology is not there, right? It's because we've chosen not to allow it to happen.
right. I mean, the tech is there, and even in the bands that we're talking about coming into auction and coming into play, where we could, get access to the next round of spectrum. Some of it doesn't have a product available yet, but it doesn't mean that industry isn't at the edge of its seat waiting to build a product for it or adjust an existing product to be able to incorporate it. So, I feel like we've been sitting still for too long, and it's time to shuffle the deck.
Yeah, I think it's time to see the Federal Communications Commission actually um, be reinvented. I think I'm ready for it.
Yeah, especially as it stands now, it's not creative, it's not innovative, it's barely even doing the job it's tasked to do.
I mean, I would
So,
say that like since you and I have been working together for 20 years, I don't think we've had a chair that we both think has done a good job.
no, and even some of the chairs that were temporary that we thought were going to do a good job were sort of handcuffed during an interim period and weren't able to pull the trigger on a lot of real activity that could have made, really changed the game. So yeah, it's been fairly frustrating for a number of decades now, and that may just be government, but I feel like we're headed down a path that isn't necessarily level. It's going downhill.
Yeah. So this is a good time for people to plug in. We can make a difference over time, but like this stuff doesn't just happen. We need people to step up, get involved, inform themselves, get inspired, and if nothing else, support us with some funds. Whether it's Waskawiwa and the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Public Knowledge. We're doing this with shoestrings, and so anything that you can do to help out along these lines. There's not a lot of us out there waging these wars. It feels like.
That's right. More allies, the better. I've been on 3 calls in the last 4 days with the FCC, and surprisingly, we had almost 20 people on one of the calls. That's probably the most people I've seen on a call in 8 years. So that was encouraging. We do have some new people involved, but at a time where we need to stack the deck because we certainly are up against it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, man. Great to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unbuffered podcast. We have transcripts for this and other episodes available at ilsr.org/podcast. While you're there, check out our other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @CommunityNets. You can catch the latest research from all of our initiatives by subscribing to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount helps keep us going. Unbuffered is produced by Christopher Mitchell, with editing provided by me, Jordan Pittman. Until next time, thanks for listening.